of knights, an earlier group of knights established around the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Okay, we're starting to go down the rabbit trail a little bit. Hey, wait, you mean there's an earlier order to the Knights Templar that's before 1118? Okay, so here's the source right here. Okay, so it says, when the Christians had conquered Jerusalem, many knights dedicated themselves to the temple of the sepulchre, and later on, many from all lands dedicated themselves to it. Good knights had dedicated themselves to it, so they consulted together amongst themselves and said, we have left our lands and our loved ones and have come here to raise up and exalt the law of God. So we rest here, eating and drinking and spending without doing any work. We do not perform any deeds of arms either, although this country has need of that. We obey a priest, and so we do not labor of arms. Let us take advice, and with our prior's permission, we shall make one of us our master, who may lead us to battle when necessary. So at this time, Baldwin II was king of Jerusalem. So they came to him and they asked for permission. They decided that they wanted to do this. The king was delighted with this, and he said he was willing to advise them and aid them. And then, of course, at that, the king sent for the patriarch of Jerusalem, the archbishops, and the bishops and the barons and all that. And they took counsel and they agreed. And, of course, they went to the sepulchre, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is the place where they believe a building that was built over the site of where they say Jesus was crucified and where he resurrected. I've been to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. It's pretty interesting. Now, the sign of the sepulchre is a cross with two scarlet arms. And, of course, later on, the Hospitallers will have that. And those of the temple will carry a cross that is completely scarlet, but it's still based upon the plan of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which was a cruciform plan. Does that make sense? So now we're getting to the origins of the cross pattern that we see upon them. Okay, we're almost there. So, but this is happening pretty earlier on. From the testimony of the Chronicle of Ernol and, of course, Bernard, the treasurer, it appears that the knights emerged from the Knights Hospitallers, that while they were this group around the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, Hospitallers are starting to be formed, but there will be another group that will eventually be understood as the Templars from that same context. You guys got it? I know. You can see why they're going to shroud it in mystery, because the Templars and the Hospitallers don't like each other. So one doesn't want to admit coming from the other. But there you have it. Okay, and so the Knights Hospitaller as a formal group, however, were formed after the First Crusade in 1113, 5 years before the Templars. But they still kind of existed even earlier than that. The Hospitallers, you know what they were responsible for? That's right, taking care of pilgrims who arrived in Jerusalem. Wait, not Rietveld. No, wait. No. The Templars are in charge of taking care of pilgrims. Yeah, that's right. The Hospitallers are in charge of taking care of pilgrims? Yeah. Okay, so here to clarify. So what will happen is the Templars will be protecting the pilgrims as they're getting towards Jerusalem, and the Hospitallers, like a tag team, will start to take over from there, and to make sure that they are medically in good shape. So they will start to take, after the long trip, they will start to take care of them. Were they injured on the way? Hospitallers, right? And so eventually the Hospitallers were not only connected with taking in those pilgrims, but also making sure that they are healthy. And so eventually they'll be treating the sick. Does that make sense? But this is a gradual situation. Now, here we go to the topic of Hugh. Hugh de Payens. Remember the guy that formed the Templars? While it is often claimed that Hugh was a veteran of the First Crusade, and this may be true, he also probably left immediately afterwards. Hugh now attends a synod at a place known as Troyes in France in 1104, after which Hugh returns to the Holy Land in the company of Count Hugh of Campania, excuse me. Well, I think that's interesting because now we have to keep track of two Hughes. Okay, so we have, I'm sorry, Hugh was a popular name in those days, you know? So Hugh of Peons is going to be different from Count Hugh. You guys got it? Hold that. So when I talk about Count Hugh, we're not talking about the guy that founded the Templars. Okay? But we have to know these sources. So, okay, so Peons, excuse me. Okay, so Hugh goes with Hugh, Count Hugh, to Jerusalem between 1104 to 1107, and then he returns with him again in 1114 to 1116. I know you're thinking to yourself, Dr. Rietveld, why are we going through these Hughs? Hugh 1, Hugh 2. I think it's a little bit hubris to assume that I know what I'm talking about. Okay, bad joke aside, what's going to happen? These tough nights, I got to tell you. So what's going to happen is the Count Hugh and Hugh Peons, they will go to Jerusalem twice, but there is a very important letter that hints at another organization that the Knights Templar are a part of. The beauty of primary sources. So here it is. Okay, so when Count Hugh went to Jerusalem in 1114, along with Hugh de Peons, Ivo and the Bishop of Chartres, right? Ivo, the Bishop of Chartres, wrote to the Count a letter. So this is the letter that counts. Okay. With a strong rebuke towards the Count Hugh for leaving his wife a second time to the Holy Land. Now, while the Knights Templar did not exist in 1114, right, Ivo reminds Hugh in this letter how he had taken vows, quote, to that knighthood of Christ in order to take up the gospel knighthood by which 2,000 may fight securely against him who rushes to attack us with 200,000. Adding to this puzzle, there is a phrase that Bernard of Clairvaux would use later on in reference to the Templars, that, of course, that they are those who are the Knights of Christ. And yet this is before we have the Knights of Christ. Now, there existed some loose orders that many wealthy people joined to protect churches from bandits in Western Europe, but this hardly fits the context of this letter. And why would someone as wealthy as Count Hugh join such a common order that would be deemed as so important by the Bishop of Chartres? This would mean that Count Hugh joined an official crusade order. But what order was that? It's certainly not the Hospitallers, and the Templars did not exist yet. This would leave another order. Here it is. The Order of Notre Dame of Zion. Oh, now we're going somewhere. Now you're going, okay, thank you, Dr. Rietveld. We were going through all this. We've all heard about the Prior in Zion, right? You know, Da Vinci Code, you know, you're wondering where they're getting these ideas. Well, now, unfortunately, nobody is going to sit through a scholar going through the evidence except for you guys. So I'm showing you where the evidence is. It's in this letter. So we'll go back a little bit further. Now we have the Order of the Notre Dame of Zion, also known as the Priory of Zion. Despite all the popular hype, it really did exist. Yes, it did, but it's hardly a secret society. One of Godfrey's few official acts as the ruler of Jerusalem during his very short reign from July of 1099 to July 18th of 1100 CE was to renew the charter of a local abbey located on Mount Sion, just outside of the city walls. Just who the monks were at this abbey is uncertain, but many believe they were Augustinian. Still, the extant evidence shows they only called themselves the Order of Notre Dame of Zion. As for their church, which was built upon the earlier 4th century church, they called it the Mother of all Churches. However, we find a charter of the Order of Notre Dame of Zion signed by the prior by the name of Arnaldus, that is dated on July 19th, 1116. More importantly, we find another charter signed by Prior Arnaldus with Hugh de Payens of the Knights Templar on May 2nd, 1125. So it is clear that the Order of Notre Dame of Zion and the Knights Templar did indeed associate with one another, as we have the primary source evidence. While the belief that the Knights Templar were organized to form the military arm of the Order of Notre Dame of Zion, no contemporary witness survives to confirm this assertion, but we do have the evidence that they were indeed associated with one another. Is that good? So there is a connection. How much of a connection, we are not sure. But so it appears that you're going to have a few influences to the background of the Knights Templar. One, of course, is around the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is one order that will eventually become the Knights Hospitaller, with another group kind of part of that informal group, and seem to have an association with this other prior, and then eventually they will stand alone as a military order. You guys got it? So there's a gradual evolution. I told you it's complicated, but I think you guys got to figure it out. Okay, so that's part of the fun part, or maybe the not so fun part. Apparently, when Count Hugh returned to France a second time, Hugh de Payens remained in the Holy Land. Accordingly, Hugh de Payens then knighted 8 others. Okay, he knighted 8 others to be a part of the order. Dramatic.
Sorry, Dad.
Dramatic. So, from 1118 to 1129, you know how many Templars there were? 9. Do you guys see a problem with that? Wait, 9? Wait, 9 pilgrims? 9 Templars to safeguard pilgrims? That's kind of that's not a lot of people. You're seeing a problem here, right? Yeah. Okay. So the initiation, of course, included, of course, Joffrey. He joined along with Hugh and a few others. We have their names. I won't go through all the names, but yeah, it's a very small group. There's other evidence too that the Knights may have existed even earlier too. In fact, there's another source from Simon Saint Bertin, which is written between 1135 to 1137, which records that a group of knights that fit the Templars' description already existed during the short reign of Godfrey from 1099 to 1100. While Godfrey, was reigning magnificently, some had decided not to return to the shadows of the world after suffering such dangers for God's sake. On the advice of the Prince of God's army, they vowed themselves to God's temple. Under this rule, they would renounce the world, give up personal goods, free themselves to pursue purity, and lead a communal life wearing the poorer habits, only using arms to defend the land against the attacks of insurgent pagans when necessity demanded, which is very much a description of the Templars. But the problem is that the Templars were founded in 1118, and this is between 1099 to 1100. Are you guys seeing a problem yet? Yeah, you're seeing a problem. The problem is, wow, where did they come from? It is very mysterious. Why? Turns out the Templars were busy in other activities. And let's go there. So what were they doing between the time of possibly being founded at the same time? Did you guys note that? That the prior of Zion was renegotiated. At that same time, you suddenly have this other group forming that's a military order, which does seem to show that maybe there's a connection between those two. At the same time, the formation resembled another group, but this group happened to be Muslims. Ooh, we just got interesting. What? Wait, what? Yes, there's another group. They're called the Nizari Ismailis. Nizari Ismailis, also known as the Assassins. Have you guys ever heard of the Assassins before? Many of you have, right? And so what will happen is that the Crusaders want their own version of the Assassins. You guys got it? So the Muslims have their version. So we're going to have our version, which means there'll be a lot of subterfuge going on. No wonder it took a long time to figure these guys out. But yes, so the Nizari Ismailis, I can go into the whole background of them, but I will not. But I will talk about that the Hazan Saba created this order of Shiite Nizari Ismaili warriors, and he was their undisputed master. He lived from 1050 to 1124. So the assassins existed a good while. Now what happens here is that they are understood to be, interesting, men who are practicing the art of combat. They were fierce missionary warriors. Sound familiar? And they were to fight against perceived heresy. Hey, wait a minute. Hey, is that the same as the Knights Templar? Yeah. These warriors became experts of what is known as Feruza. What does that mean? The idea that they were taught to ride their horses as expert knights in combat. They were skilled in archery, and they were instructed to charge with a lance. They're also into a game known as chess. They thought that this was great to learn new kinds of strategies. So these warriors, these assassins, were in charge of killing Muslim political leaders that would oppose them, but they would go undercover, learning the culture and the local dialect or language of their potential target. They were taught to be very patient, to gradually work their way into the leader's confidence. And when the time was right, with an opportunity that they happened to be vulnerable, then they went in for the kill. So some cases, the Ismaili warrior would be your best friend, your great advisor, the guy right next to you. You trust him most of all. It did not matter, of course, because he was quietly trying to build your confidence. And to kill you in the light of day was considered a real honor. That's right, because then you show off your power. So they don't mind dying for the cause. Interesting. At first, though, they would give a warning. Sometimes they would, put something under their pillow like a dagger. They're kind of after you. But if that didn't happen, then, of course, they'd stab you with a blade soaked in poison. And they did this quite often. The center of their activities happened to be Alamat Castle, which is just south of the Caspian Sea. And it's interesting how they got this castle. By the Alamat Castle, what they did is the Ismaili, this group, what they did is converted all the other villages around the castle to their cause and their beliefs. And then from there, it converted all the men of the castle. And then the castle simply opened up and it became theirs. But with the Ismaili, the assassins it's all about patience and fortitude and waiting for the best time to strike. Kind of like your cat, cats do that. They some of the wild cats, they'll be hunting you for days, hiding behind bushes, lurking in the shadows. Eventually they will strike. That's what the assassins were like. They waited for the best possible moment to strike. and then they did so. There's some interesting stories. One time, can I tell you one Molly's story? Because this does fit in with the bravery of the Templars. What happened is that one time there was a Count Henry. He came back from Armenia. He's a Crusader, and he told that person known as the Old Man of the Mountain. His name was Sinan, who is in charge of this castle. He told Sinan that since his army was bigger than his, he should pay him tribute. Sinan, who's in charge of the castle, disagreed, telling him that what his men did in numbers, they certainly made up in spirit. Next, Sinan looked up at one of his men standing high upon the wall of his fortress and signaled for him to jump. The man instantly jumped, calling out, "God is great!" and fell down dead in front of Henry. Dumbfounded, Henry asked, why did he do this? At which point, Sinan looked up at the second man who replaced him on top of the castle and went, and the man cried out, "God is great!" and jumped and fell to his death. At that point, Henry agreed to a peace treaty without tribute because they were completely committed. Guess who had copied the same idea? The Knights Templar. Does that make sense? The same ferocious spirit that they will, and we'll see this at the siege of Acre. You'll see this amazing bravery amongst so many of them. They will sacrifice themselves no matter what to the death. But the interesting part about it is there's other similarities between them, including, I'll have to tell you this, their initiation. When we get to the initiation of the Templars, you'll see this. There's the same form of initiation that was done with the assassins. Isn't this interesting? So it looks like point counterpoint. You have the big bad assassins on your side. We could do the same. We could play the game, and exactly what they did for a period of time seems to be pretty cloak and dagger, literally. And so we don't know exactly what happened, but all of a sudden, ta-da! They become official. They become official, and then for 10 years, there's only 9 of them. Very strange indeed. So 1118 to 1129. There you have it. Okay, so what's going to happen is that their number remained the same for all that time. We'll talk about what they may have been doing around the temple site. The temple, of course, that means the Temple of Jerusalem, which is now obviously the site of the Dome of the Rock. Now, under Pope Honorius II, establishing official rule for the Knights in 1129 at the Council of Troyes, because didn't have any official official rule until that point. Wow, that's kind of late. I know. William of Tyre continues. In their 9th year, there was held in France at Troyes a council at which the Lord Archbishops of Rome and Song and their sufferants were present. And basically, long and short of it is, a rule is established. The Templars were then organized into 4 divisions. The first group, they were called the Knights. The first division, they're the Knights. They were the heavy cavalry. They wore a white habit with a red cross. The second group, they're called the Sergeants, and they were equipped as light cavalry. The sergeants were often selected from the lower social classes and wore brown instead of a white mantle. The third group, they're called the Serving Brothers or Rural Brothers. They were in charge of the order's property, and they also oversaw those who performed the more mundane work needed to keep the infrastructure going. And finally, the fourth group are known as the chaplains, so those who are ordained priests and saw to the spiritual needs of the order. The Grand Master of the Knights Templar was selected to be head for life. He was very powerful. He is able to declare war or call a truce. When he died, he went out. What will happen is they would have 13 delegates that then will choose the next person to be in charge? Let's go into detail. You want to know what an average Templar day is like? Here, Dr. Rietveld, too much information. Thank you. The average Templar, you have to wake up at 4 a.m. Right there, I'm not joining. 4 a.m. in the morning, attending a religious service known as matins, during which they were expected to recite 13 Our Lords and pray to Our Lady. Do you notice the emphasis on Our Lady? Wait a minute, Our Lady of Zion. Isn't that interesting? In fact, we take a look at the various rules, and so much is around the veneration of Mother Mary, which was, again, the focus of the Prior of Zion. You're seeing more and more connections to where people see this. Okay, after that, Prime followed at 6 a.m., with more Our Lords being said at 6 a.m. Guess what happens after that? Yeah, you got Mass. Wow. And then you have sect at 11:30. By this time, the Knights Templars have said about 60 Our Lords, 30 for the living and 30 for the dead. And then, of course, the prayers from the latter were believed to release one from purgatory. Then finally, you get a break from church. Yeah, that was at noon. And you have to eat this meal in complete silence. The dishes were vegetarian. That's right. You were only served meat on twice a week, to keep up your strength. But that's it. And then, of course, back to prayer time, 2:30 p.m. And then Vespers at 6 p.m. And finally, an evening meal, after which you go right to bed, right? In between that time, you're supposed to be as busy as possible, working the fields, cleaning the dormitories, or some other activity, never being idle. But central to their devotion, if we take a look at the rule, is upon the Virgin Mary. In fact, Our Lady, they call her all the time, Our Lady. Rule 306 of the Templar rule basically says the hours of Our Lady should be said first in this house, because Our Lady was the beginning of our order. Wait, stop. Wait, did I just say that? Yes. But Dr. Rietveld, it doesn't, no, the order didn't start with Our Lady. The Prior of Zion started with Our Lady. I know. What are we going to do with this evidence? Is it so? Once again, existed beforehand, right? Okay. Yes. So because Our Lady was the beginning of our order, and in her honor and in her, if it pleases God, will be the end of our lives and the end of our order, whenever God wishes it to be. That's pretty straightforward. What do you think, right? So many people will say, once again, why is everything focused on Our Lady? And many people will say, well, it's the Order of Notre Dame, which means the Order of Our Lady of Zion. And it's very possible. Obviously, moving right along, but what in the world did 9 people do between 1118 and 1129? I mean, what do they do? There's lots of theories, right, going around. But we do know that they were established directly upon the Temple Mount. We do know that for an absolute fact, around what is called the Temple of Solomon, hence that's why they're called the Templars. And they also became known as the Poor Knights of Christ, or they call them the Knights of the Temple of Solomon. So lots of names, right? There you go. Now what will happen is that, moving right along, the Templars are thriving, and we're ready actually to go into the more mysterious part. So here we're going to go. The Templars, what were they doing during this period of time? What were they doing? And even after that, why are they established around the Temple Mount. Now, the Temple Mount today is the Dome of the Rock. The Dome of the Rock, you have on top. The Dome of the Rock was built, between 691 to 692. It was built over the Raqqa Foundation at this particular place. It is the third most holy site of Islam. It is believed that this is where Muhammad rose up into the heavens and was proclaimed as the final prophet in what is called the night flight. So this is very sacred, the Raqqa Foundation. Before that, the Raqqa Foundation was located under the Jewish temple, and it was the Raqqa Foundation in connection to Jewish beliefs. And so they believed, even Muslims also believe this, that maybe there's a secret opening there that leads to the Garden of Eden that people were cut off from. So it is a sacred rock. In fact, it is said that at the end of time, that the Raqqa Foundation will meet with the Kaaba stone, and that will be the end of the universe, and of course, the beginning of the new one. So it's a very important site, right? But it is, again, the site of the Temple of Jerusalem. So you know that the Knights Templar, who are now officially in charge of this site, will be interested in seeing what is going on under the site. Does that make sense? The Temple of Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 CE, and nothing was there until between 291 and 292. Before that time, it was used as a garbage dump. That's pretty upsetting, right? But this is considered a very holy site. Okay, so what will happen is that many people have rumors that maybe there are treasures under the Temple Mount. And so maybe the Knights Templars were digging under the temple site looking for the treasure. Maybe, perhaps, maybe the Ark of the Covenant was located underneath the Temple Mount. Hey, it's possible. So what do you think, Dr. Rietveld? Do you think that they were digging under the temple? Ah, yes, we're archaeology land. Welcome. Yeah, I knew, and I'll tell you this right now, and this is not conspiracy theory. The Knights Templars did dig under the temple, for sure. And I'm going to give you the archaeological evidence right now. Isn't that cool? Yes, they did. They were digging under the temple. So if anybody comes up and says, hey, they weren't really digging under the temple, you can tell them, Dr. Rietveld says, yes, they did. They were digging for something. So how do we know this? Well, all the way back in 1867, you had the Warren Expedition under the London-based Palestinian Exploration Fund, and they extensively examined under the Temple Mount and discovered multiple tunnels and passageways all beneath the site that were made over many millennia. They found that the Temple Mount was a combination of many hills gradually thrown together and leveled off on top with a mix of wells and aqueducts and sewers and cisterns and drains all sandwiched in between. At one point, as they broke into one tunnel, the nose of the sledgehammers and other tools used by his team had disturbed the prayers of the faithful going on above in the Alaska Mosque. Oops. So basically, at the Alaska Mosque, which is looking right next to the Dome of the Rock, they hear all this drilling, and they're trying to pray. Talk about busted, right? The result, of course, was a hail of stones, a riot, and, of course, an order from Izzet Pasha, the governor of the city, that the dig should be suspended immediately. Then, of course, the tunnels beneath the Alaska Mosque were sealed, but they did make some findings. They discovered water wells heading the direction of the springs of Gihon and other things. They found other tunnels crisscrossing in various places. Sorry, my light is starting to burn my screen. That's not good. Oh, I'm smelling something. I'm smelling some smoke. Okay, so I apologize. It will not look as good, but hey, I won't keep you out in the dark. Moving right along. Bad joke aside. So then what happens is that there's the Parker expedition to the Temple Mount in 1911. It was inspired by a Finnish mystic who was searching for the Ark of the Covenant. His name is Juvelius. He believed that the first chapter of the book of Ezekiel was actually a cipher telling us where exactly the Jews hid the Ark of the Covenant just before the Babylonians arrived, right? And they believed the cipher indicated that the Ark was located just south of the Alaska Mosque. And so, yes, they went to investigate. And as they're investigating, they found the city of David. They found, of course, lots of tunnels. They found Hezekiah's tunnel, for example. But things got a little bit more complicated as time goes on, especially because of the heavy winter. The rains made the tunnels blocked with fresh mud. But they did notice a few things. They noticed that a lot of the arch vaults had were Crusader to hold up these tunnels. Uh-oh. Wait, Crusader? Wait, only the Knights Templars? Okay. Okay. Okay, now we're finding evidence, right, to support it. Yeah, they're the only ones that are making it. And they're starting to find Crusader materials also in the mud. Caught. Yeah. So we keep going. Of course, with this one, it's pretty funny or sad. They actually bribed an official at the Dome of the Rock to go inside to start to literally dig on the foundation stone. And they closed it all off. They bribed the guy. And some of all things, some worshipers came in at that moment. And there was this huge scream. The English were running as fast as they can with the Finnish guy in behind. They actually got into their slow-moving automobiles. They went off to the Jaffa Harbor. They hopped in their motorized yacht, and they're being chased by the authorities. But the authorities, they caught them, they threw them in jail, and they had, of course, not say anything else. In fact, what they found under there, they published as following. The Parker excavation said as follows. Parker said, "I am committed to reveal nothing to outsiders until such time as shall be decided by the leaders of the expedition. I hope that those who feel frustrated by my silence will consider that a like discretion will be at their disposal should I be asked to engage in a similar project at some future time." In other words, he was sworn to secrecy. Wow, that does sound like a conspiracy theory, doesn't it? I can't say what I saw, right? We think we're done yet. No, 1968, all right? Yes, yet another excavation. This time they went under what's called the Solomon Stables. And of course, once again, the tunnels lead inward for a distance of about 30 meters from the southern wall before being blocked by pieces of stone debris. We know that it continues further, but we had to make it hard and fast rule not to excavate within the bounds of the Temple Mount, which is currently under Muslim jurisdiction, without first acquiring the permission of the appropriate Muslim authorities. In this case, they permitted us only to measure and photograph the exposed section of the tunnel, not to conduct an excavation. Upon concluding this work, we sealed the tunnels up with stone, yada, yada. And they mentioned the fact, they mentioned directly that they had found evidence, obviously, not only of the Templar materials, but also a place where the Templars stored their horses. So they used it as a stable down below. Okay, so I just answered a big question, right? I just did. Did they excavate under the temple? Yes. Do you know anybody else who has seen the evidence of the Crusader materials under the temple? Do you know anybody else who has seen the Crusader arch under the Temple Mount? And I'm going, yeah, me. Yeah, I've been down there. I won't say too much more. Have I seen the Crusader arch down underneath? Yes. So I'm an eyewitness. Yep. So how's that? Okay, moving right along. Okay, so they were digging. That's cool. The real question is, did they find anything? That's the question we need to ask, right? Did they find anything? Okay, so there's a few other stories. This leads into conspiracies. I don't want to go there. I just want to say that during the short period of time, they got really rich fast. That's true. They got really rich fast. And that's interesting. Maybe they have good investors. That's possible. But yeah, 9 guys got wealthy. Now, already noted, the Templars could have been looking for the Ark of the Covenant. Sounds like a good ending. This now, I told you we're going to go there, right? Yeah, we're going there now. But you had to kind of get through all the other stuff to get here, right? Literally. Okay, so now the Templars could have been looking for the Ark of the Covenant. In 1185, the Templar Knights accompanied an exiled prince by the name of Lalibela, who from Jerusalem back to his native Ethiopia, and then made him king. That in and of itself is interesting, that you have these Templars that are going along with this Ethiopian prince and to make him king in Ethiopia. That's interesting. 1185. The Ethiopians tell how, quote, men with red and white complexions assisted King Lalibela, who reigned from 1181 to 1221, in building 11 rock-carved churches in the kingdom. Well, guess what? These churches, these rock-carved churches still exist. They're preserved, and they do indeed date from the mid-13th century, from exactly the time we know. Many of the crosses on these churches happen to resemble, yes, the Templar cross. Now, here we go to tales. Some Ethiopian tales claim that these white men also brought the Ark of the Covenant with them. You can see how these legends get started. Okay, well, maybe, maybe not. It must be noted that this would have happened in 1185. 2 years later, Jerusalem would fall to Salon in 1187. So 2 years before the fall of Jerusalem, a whole bunch of Knights Templar go to Ethiopia. And that is history. And that is kind of strange. And they do make the guy king of Ethiopia. That is strange too, right? Later, I will mention in 1270, you're going to have the king of Ethiopia, a certain Makutu Lab, was forced to abdicate and was replaced by Yukunu Amlak, who claimed that he descended from King Solomon and Queen of Sheba through their son Menelik I, and that this man was the one who brought the Ark of the Covenant with him to Ethiopia. Well, what this did, though, is that by making this claim it's through his line, he had to invalidate the Crusader story of the Knights Templar. Are you guys getting this? So he changed the story around, possibly. This contradicts the other story and the dedication by the Templars. Later, the powerful Ethiopian king, Widem Arad, sent a very large embassy to Clement V at Avignon in 1306. And you go thinking, why is that a big deal? The very year, and of course he left in 1307, the very year the Templars were condemned. That's kind of strange. Not the strange things, you know, it doesn't mean anything, but it is a coincidence because they have a different narrative than the Templar narrative, you know. But the other strange question is, what in the world is the Ethiopian king doing visiting Clement at that time? It's just, again, we're going into realms that rabbit trails, well, that could be problematic. So, and you're saying, yeah, but were there treasures under the temple? And the answer is Yes. Where's the evidence? You guys ever heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls? Yeah. Uh-oh. That's right. They discovered the copper scroll, the Dead Sea Scrolls, on March 20th, 1952. And the copper scroll is literally made of copper. It took a very long time to unravel. The copper scroll lists an inventory of treasures, including gold and silver ritual vessels, and tells where they are buried. It's a treasure map, right? And of course, many of the 64 deposit sites are either directly on or around the Temple Mount. We got it. So, is there any question that the Knights Templar dug under the temple? No, they didn't. Is there any question that there were treasure hidden under the temple? No, we have the copper scroll, right? These scrolls are from the second to the first century BCE, right? And then going into the first century CE. Does that make sense? So these are 2,000 years old. This is long before the Knights Templar. Okay. So most scholars agree the list is legitimate. In fact, it's hardly a scholar out there who doesn't agree that the Dead Sea Scroll, known as the Copper Scroll, is listing actual treasures that were under the temple. By the way, they don't spend the time telling the general public that. That would save a lot of time, wouldn't it? Yeah, okay. But here's the problem. The problem is that maybe somebody else found the treasure map. There's a theory that there was another copy of the Copper Scroll that the Knights Templar found. And because there were multiple copies of these kinds of things. And then they used it to look for the treasure. That's why they're digging about. But that's still circumstantial. You want me to give you the boring answer? I think the Romans probably dug up everything. I think the Romans, if there's a map to be found, the Romans are really good at sniffing out gold and treasure. And there's so much that went out under Titus through the arch, she became the Arch of Titus, all the treasures in the temple. It's probably all those that they found. Maybe. But there you have it. So that's another theory. So maybe the Ark of the Covenant, maybe not. Are you guys having fun yet? Right? Am I answering some questions? I think I am, right? There's another theory, and of course, this goes into the Holy Grail. The theory is that the Templars discovered the Holy Grail beneath the Temple Mount. Whatever the Holy Grail may be, whether a cup or a chalice that may have held the blood of Christ, or a stone from heaven, or a sword, or a lance, or a secret gospel, or even some preserved manna from heaven. A large portion of the Grail romances were composed directly during the era of the Templars. They were composed during that time, between 1190 and 1140. And while Templars are mentioned by name in only one of them in connection to the Grail, named Wolfram's Parsifal, not one of them was actually written by a Templar. Still, there seems to be lots of associations. One interesting part is the first Grail romance was composed at a place known as Troyes. If that sounds familiar, it should, because that's the center of Templar country. That's where the Templar order came about, and that's where we get the first Grail romance from the very same city. That's interesting. Which, of course, could be relevant, as I mentioned. The author of this Grail romance was Christian de Troyes. Here, Parsifal is a guileless knight, the archetypical fool whose primary trait is innocence. He encounters the Grail during a feast at a mysterious castle presided over by a lame man who's known as the Fisher King. Christian calls the object simply un Graal, and its appearance is just one of the unusual events that take up much of this narrative. Percival is also shown a broken sword, which must be mended. The two objects together, sword and grail, are symbols of Percival's development as a true knight. Ultimately, the grail is revealed to be a platter bearing the single Eucharist wafer. Unfortunately, he died before it was completed, because that's what we want. So it left everybody kind of going, we want more. So other people decided to fill in the gap with other stories. One interesting addition to the story is the Chapel of the Black Hand. Here, a phantom hand has a penchant for snuffing out candles. But we can go into all the Grail romances. There's a few others too. You have the one that has to do with Joseph of Arimathea, and of course the Grail there. And the idea is Joseph was thrown in prison. He has a vision. Christ brings the Grail to Joseph in prison, where he sustains him and teaches him its secrets. Joseph is freed by the Emperor Vespasian and has been cured from his ailment. And so Joseph establishes a second table of the Grail, and goes on and so forth. You got a few of these. You have Parzival. Parzival, I will mention, there's so many of these, but I want to bring up Parzival. This is a good one. This is Wolfram von Eichenbach, who composed Parzival between 1197 to 1209. He was a poor knight who spent a considerable time at the court of Landgrave Hermann and at the famous Wartburg near Erfurt. In this story, the Grail is a sacred stone. Here it is. A sacred stone bestowing longevity. A stone of the purest kind, called lapsit exilius. Obviously, there never was human so ill that if he one day sees the stone, he cannot die within the week that follows. And though he should see the stone for 200 years, his appearance will never change, save that perhaps his hair might turn gray, unless you're bald. So now you have, of course, we have the stone that's connected to eternal life. Now the stone, the words lapsit exilius has two possible translations. It can mean stone from heaven or stone from exile. So there you have it. And Wolfram asserts that this Grail stone was an emerald that fell from Lucifer's crown during the war in heaven. And so there you have it. According to other sources, for example, the hermit Temperament tells Parzival that the Templars, were guardians of the Grail castle, where the sacred stone is stored. These Templar Grail Knights did not survive on human food, but on food given to them from a divine source. This food gives these knights eternal youth, and they remain healthy as long as they reside in the Grail castle. Wolfram describes how a phoenix perpetually sits on the luminous stone and continually burns and then rises from the ashes and is reborn. But you still have here the Templars actually as the guardians. Obviously, this is not a talk on Grail romances, but you're going to see that the Templars are associated with these kinds of stories. In fact, it goes on and on and on, and I have page after page on that. But we won't go through them all. Wow, we have a lot on that one. So you have the possibility of them finding the Holy Grail is a possibility. Okay, so in 1130, a new pope was elected, and Bernard Clairvaux favored one particular pope who was very unpopular. And to make a long story short, he goes about the countryside and he pushes for this pope to the point where people do become convinced. And as a result, we have Innocent II becomes pope. Now, Bernard of Clairvaux is connected very much with the Knights Templars. In fact, his maternal uncle was a member of that order. And so he's going to now encourage them with not only through his power, but through papal power. That's right. So now the Pope is behind the Templars. Nothing could possibly go wrong now, right? With official backing from the church. I mean, there's no way they're going to become corrupt with all that power, right? Right? So, yeah, well, maybe not. Okay, so what's going to happen is they seem to be honest for a period of time, but as time goes on, they do tend to start becoming a little bit more corrupt, a little bit more lazy, and that becomes really a problem. The reputation starts to spread as well. One thing that they do, though, which I find is interesting, is that I told you they're still kind of in charge of the idea of pilgrims going to protecting them, going to the Holy Land. So they think up an idea. Those pilgrims are oftentimes robbed. Oh, what can we do about that? What we can do is if you're a pilgrim going to Jerusalem, you give your wealth to be put into our temple, and then we write up a ledger of what that's worth. Then what happens is as you travel, you use these checks to pay off things. So, and has the official Templar emblems. And so, all they're going to steal is something that's worthless except for you because it is written in your name. It's pretty good. And you can get to the Holy Land safely. And whatever you spend, the Templars get to keep in their temples, which are oftentimes circular buildings located throughout France and England. This is making sense. So that means that they're going to start getting wealthy monetarily through this checking system, and that's going to be kind of a problem. The Templars also bring back a new technology. It's pretty amazing from Persia. It's called stained glass windows, and they're bringing that back, and there's a whole industry of how to. But the Persians gave the secret. So, and these will be used obviously in Gothic cathedrals, by the way, which start at exactly the same time as the Templars become active. So there is a link between the Templars and Gothic cathedrals and stained glass windows, which, by the way, were needed in order to accommodate stained glass windows. You need to have flying buttresses to make the walls thin, to have the windows being shown off in the first place. Have you ever thought about that? And of course, the emphasis upon light. The other thing I want to remind you is that all these churches are named after who? So many are named after Notre Dame. That's right, all over the place. Hey, didn't they love Notre Dame? Absolutely. So you're seeing connections there. So that's also a part of their legacy. But also, a major part of their order were a group of special masons. Wait, what? Yeah, rule number 325. No brother should wear leather gloves except the chaplain brother, and the mason brothers may wear them sometimes, and it's permitted them because of great suffering they endure, and so they do not easily endure their hands, but they should not wear them when they are not working. The masons were not full knights, but they were involved in all the building projects connected to the Templars. So they had masons as a part of their order. Is this kind of fascinating? Just kind of throwing all at this. We do know that the Templars were involved in esoteric and occult knowledge. How do we know? Using sacred geometry and alchemy. Because Knights Templar, when they're in jail, get bored. And when they get bored, they start writing on the walls. And they wrote all over the walls of various places sacred geometry and alchemy. The evidence is absolutely direct. For example, Chinon Castle, which was once a prisoner for 60 Templars in 1308, is filled with sacred geometry, many of which has not been deciphered as of yet. Well, of course, unfortunately, bad things are starting to happen. And that is Jerusalem is going to be lost. And because of that, the Knights Templar are forced out of Jerusalem in 1187 under Salon. And they end up going to Acre, also known as Acre. If you're American, it's Acre. Okay, so Acre or Acre, and so they make so the Muslims are starting to move forward. Jerusalem is lost. The Knights Templar lose a very big battle at Jacob's Ford. Over 800 Crusaders are slaughtered, including many Templars. And so they're forced to move to their new headquarters at Acre or Acre, and they're there for a while. But unfortunately, it's not going to last. I don't have time to tell you the entire story, but I will just say this because this goes on for 3 or 4 pages. But I will say that they fought bravely for a very long time. At one point, you're going to have a great tower that's standing, and the Knights Templar bring in as many as they can from the inhabitants of the city into this tower in the surrounding areas as the Muslims are taking over the majority of the city, and Muslims start to excavate underneath this tower, and they realize that they got to get rid of these forces, and so this Templars, what they do is they rig their own tower. They make the people hiding there vacate. They rig their own tower where they themselves are going to die, but they're going to rig the tower to collapse on the Muslims below, and they died with honor. Interesting. You're going to have stories also of people fighting. In one case, the head of the order suddenly, in the middle of the fight, he just kind of walks off, and they say, "Why are you walking off? I mean, are you giving up?" He's like, "Oh no, see," and he just casually shows an arrow through his underarm that went straight to his heart, just calmly going to die. He did fight pretty bravely, but it did fall in 1291. But what is interesting is, why does life have to be so interesting? Before the city fell, there was a group of ships that suddenly left with the materials of the Templars to Cyprus. We don't know what that was, but what they left was stuff. Again, I don't want to fuel conspiracy theories. I just want to say they're still leaving with a whole bunch of stuff to Cyprus. They retreated. That became, of course, their new territory. And at this point, the new head is Jacques de Molay, who will be the 23rd and the last Grand Master of the Templars. So you see that. Okay, and the Templars will establish themselves at Colossae Castle in 1306, taking them from the Hospitallers, because they're weak. Sorry, Hospitallers don't know what I mean. Templars were by far the most powerful. Okay, so they're still extremely wealthy, but they kind of lost their meaning to be. Their meaning was to take care of pilgrims going to Jerusalem. We believe that by now, right? And their other, of course, is we know that they're filling the Temple Mount with more honeycombs than an anthill. I mean, the whole place is being emptied out, and that evidence we see today. So I think they still lost their meaning, and now they are in Cyprus, and why are they there, right? So I mean, of course, what will happen is there'll be this need. Jacques de Molay says we need to gain back Jerusalem. I get that, because if they don't get it back, they lost their meaning. But unfortunately, things are going from bad to worse because a lot of the Templars were extremely wealthy. In fact, they became the bankers of Europe. They owned large lands, great castles and manors. They owned industries. Uh, a lot of the kings of Europe owed them a lot of money, and for their, for lots of the wars that are going on. And of course, the most of all is Philip IV, known as Philip the Fair or the Unfair of France. He owed the most to these noble knights, lots of money. What's the best way to stop that? Get rid of them, right? So what happens is Philip says, there's a long story, again, short. You're going to have a certain Pope Clement V, 1305 to 1314. He is a French Pope, but he's kind of under the tutelage of the King of France, which is not a good idea. And so Philip wished to undo the harsh penalties against him by the previous popes. So, of course, now with the French Pope in his back pocket, he took care of that pretty quickly. But he also had a nagging problem, and that is he owed money. And he owed money to the Templars, who are now really in charge of the banking system of Europe at this time. So he tried to convince Clement, the Pope, that the Knights Templar, they were too powerful. Clement didn't want to do that, but Philip has a way of convincing people to do what he wanted to do. And so he basically says, you know what I want to do? I want to make the Templars and the Hospitallers one order. We'll abolish the Templars and we'll have them join the Hospitallers. Yeah, that's going to work. So he calls the Mole and the Hospitaller head to come and visit him. Obviously, the Templar guy gets there first and has to sit around with Philip the Unfair, who's pressuring him to join this order. And obviously, he says, there's no way I'm ever going to join the Hospitallers. You're basically completely crazy. No. So he says, well, are you sure you want to do this? Says Philip the Fair. Yes. Okay, I got something on you. What? Yeah, De Mole, I got something on you. You guys have been involved in some bad stuff. What do you mean? Well, we have, I gotta tell you, there's this knight. His name is Philip Lebel. Does his name ring a bell? And he has some information. Later on, they call him the scourge of France, or the new Pontius Pilate. Of course, he had his motivations. And so he says, well, we heard that you guys are heretics. You're involved in some pretty bad stuff. And if you don't join the Templars, I'm going to tell the world what you guys are really doing. Like what? Oh, like a few things. So, of course, the Inquisition would later on find out all these other things. So, for example, I hear that you guys spit upon the cross of Christ. That's right. And you're told to deny Christ. In fact, we have one knight under torture declared as follows. He says, I have spat 3 times on the cross, but only from my mouth and not from my heart. Ramon de Coron says, you must, he says that you must denounce this one. And so I denounce. In fact, I have the records here, and there's quite a few names with people denouncing Christ and spitting on the cross. Of course, under torture in the Inquisition. In fact, you'll say anything under that, right? So another claim was sodomy. He said, I hear you guys are getting along real well. And so that went around, the initiation. But Hugo and the others said, No, 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 no. We just there's rumors of that, but there's no evidence for that. Oh yeah, well, you guys also commit adultery, really? Yes. And so what happened is the claim was they were worshiping um, a sacred head. I actually have here a document from August 12th, 1308, and I'll read it to you a little bit here. It states, item, that in each province the order had idols, namely heads, of which some had 3 races and some 1, and others had a human skull. Item, that they adored these idols or that idol, and especially in their great chapters and assemblies. Item, that they venerated them. Item, that they venerated them as God. Item, that they venerated them as their Savior. Item, that they said that the head could save them. Item, that it could make riches. Item, that it made the trees flower. Item, that it made the lands germinate. Item, that they surrounded or touched each head in the aforesaid idols with small cords, which they wore around themselves next to their shirt or their flesh. Item, that in his reception the aforesaid small cords or some length of them were given to each of the brethren. Item, that they did this in veneration of an idol. Item, that they, the receptors, enjoined them an oath not to reveal the aforesaid to anyone. Oh, okay, there we go. There's a document, you know. And in some cases, it was said that the head was a mummified, severed head. Some people said it was the head of John the Baptist. Others, of course, it's interesting because it does turn out that the head of John the Baptist was claimed to be at Constantinople, and in 1204, the Crusaders did take the head of John the Baptist. So it is possible it got into Templar hands, although all these churches claim to have the head of John the Baptist. Of course, there's other theories. One theory was that it was the mummified head of Jesus Christ, which, of course, would obviously would erode a lot of Christianity, and hence part of the secret. Obviously, nice gossip hearsay. You have, of course, another source, and that is, hey, remember those assassins? That's right. You see, the assassins, the man of the mountain, what they used to do is they would have somebody stick their head up on a table and look like it's a severed head, and would give some kind of prophecies to the initiate. Then after that, they would quietly cut the guy's head off and put it on a stick. And so you believe that this person had his head severed when he told you the prophecy earlier. And then, of course, you do, the kissing of the head and so forth. In fact, some of the same features that were part or claimed to be part of the rituals of the initiation here. Does that make sense? So there is another tie-in with the Ismaili. There's a third story that it's of a bearded man. And of course, the fourth, that it is a Baphomet. 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 If it's okay, we'll go maybe 5 minutes over. So Baphomet. We started late, right? The Baphomet. What does this mean? Well, of course, if it's Greek, Bathe Metios could be translated, baptism of wisdom. Others say it's derived from the Arabic word Abu Fahamat, which means father of wisdom. Still others claim Baphomet is merely a corrupt word for Muhammad, based on the pronouncing of Mahomet or Muhammad. Now, so I thought, I want to answer this question. Don't you want to answer this question? Don't you want to know? So I decided to get real boring on you. And I decided to look up the word, and the first time it is found. I found it, a lot of work finding this. His name is Anselm of Rietveld. It's a document from July of 1098. And he says, Sequiti di auto. Oh, sorry, I have it in Latin, but I'll translate it. Okay. So it says, as the next day dawned, maybe I should read it in Latin, they called loudly upon Baphomet, and we prayed silently our hearts to God. So this is a reference to Muslims supposedly praying to Muhammad, which obviously Muslims would not do. So the first time the word Baphomet does appear, it is in the context that it is understood as being a reference to Muhammad. I decided to get even more boring and look up another source because why not? And Raymond of Aguez, who chronicles the First Crusade, also mentions the word Baphomet here, and he actually calls it a place of where Muslims worship, using the word Baphomet. Isn't that interesting? So it does seem the first time it does seem to have a Muslim background, which again connects again to a Muslim context. But according to various admissions of the Templars, they gave a salutation, supposedly Ya Allah or Yalla or Hail Allah or Hail God to this image. Yet it may actually be Jala Sidna, which means, "Oh God, our Lord," and it connects to. In fact, we found this word Jala Sidna, which is oh God, our Lord, found next to Templar alchemistic symbols, so it's possible. We also find these words next to a figure of a bearded man with breasts, female genitals, holding in one hand a pole holding up the sun, and in the other hand a pole holding up the moon. And this, and in some cases, we see variations of this where the head is double-headed. And yes, this is the classic Baphomet symbol. But it's connected to the pronouncement that is said before the Baphomet. Does that make sense? It's connected to, so it's not really clear. There's another version of the story, and that is the Inquisitor says, "Now tell us about the head." And Brother Raoul says, "Well, the head, I've seen it at 7 chapters held by Brother Hugh and others." The Inquisitor, "What did one do to it? Did one worship it?" Raoul says, "Well, it was like this. It was presented, and everyone threw himself on the ground, pushed back his call, and worshipped it." The Inquisitor says, "What was his face like?" "Terrible. It seemed to me that it was the face of a demon, of an evil spirit. Every time I saw it, I was filled with such terror, I could scarcely look at it, trembling in my members." And so there you have it. It looks like the Templars it's over for them, right? Right? It's really over. But the reality is, it's not over. There's suspicion that this, when you're going through, if you're going through all this torture, you're going to say anything. In fact, one knight said that he was in such pain, he would have confessed to killing God himself to stop the pain. So, I mean, they're in so much pain, they're saying anything. And then as soon as the Inquisition's over, they're all renouncing what they said. They're all saying they didn't say this, and it's ridiculous. And you know who believed them? Clement, the Pope. He agreed. He thought they're innocent. In fact, I have here his pronouncement saying that they were innocent. So, but Philip Fair, as I told you, he was nothing but unfair. What he did is that he figured out a loophole, and the loophole would be that he had a cardinal that was under his power, and any religious figure can condemn them. And so he happened to be also connected to the crown, and so this man agreed to pronounce them as guilty anyway. And the Pope then had no choice to follow another religious leader, and so then he was forced also through other means to denounce them. And so, of course, obviously, you're going to have the order then disbanded and destroyed, the burning at the stake of so many. It's pretty upsetting. There is a story of De Mole shouting out as the flames rose around his form, God knows who is wrong and who has sinned. Soon a calamity will occur to those who have condemned us to death. This story, he didn't actually say this, but what happened is De Molay didn't say this, but a Templar from Naples actually said this. Made the curse upon anybody who has done this, and it turned out that within that year, both Philip IV and Clement died. So it is known as the Templar curse. Clement died on April 20th, 1314. Philip died on November 29th, 1314. And so they both died. Who knows? And so the Templars are at an end. Or are they? Turns out nobody talked to the Portuguese about it. The Portuguese love the Templars. I mean, after all, the Templars helped them with the Reconquista from their area. And so because they're upset by that, they agreed that they should be called simply the Order of the Knights of Our Lord of Jesus Christ. And they continued as is. Yeah, they continued. So they continued going. And then those of that order that went off into Europe fell under the auspices of the Pope, who didn't do anything against them. And the Portuguese did something else. They conquered a section of South America. Well, when they conquered South America, that order went there. And so they formed a separate order called the Order of Christ of Brazil. And that was secularized in 1823, but it's still there to this day. So the Knights Templar exist today in Brazil. That's right, they exist. They're still around. So if you guys want to, visit them, you can go ahead and go off to South America, and you can pose with the Knights. I told you I ruined the whole story. You thought that they were extinguished, that something happened to them. They still exist. There is a few strange things. Right during the time of the disbanding of the Knights Templar, a whole bunch of materials disappeared from their archives and from their banks. And a lot of ships went off. And we don't know exactly what happened to those ships, but it looks like something else was being moved. It's a mystery. And maybe we should stay with the mystery. But at least the Templars lived up to their reputation. Thank you. I hope that was fun, right? Did you guys, other than my melting screen, was the sound okay? I heard that there was disturbances in the ports.
I was having a hard time understanding a lot of words you were saying, so I missed out on a lot of stuff.
So was it the sound awful, or was it? Okay.
It wasn't that bad, but it seems like when you're looking down, the sound is worse than when you're looking up and straight into the, as well as like we get to see your face and not the top of your head.
Right. But could you hear the information? I'm hoping you heard something.
Huh?
I could hear enough. Yeah, I thought it was good enough.
Okay.
Sonia, could you hear what he was saying?
Huh?
I don't think she can hear me either.
Oh, they have the microphone off.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I'm wondering what the difference is this time from last time when it comes to sound.
It's,
I think we have more people this time, maybe.
Maybe there's more of a drag on it.
Could be. Oh, didn't think of that.
Yeah, I was wondering. Okay. Any questions that you can decipher?
What was the 4 groups the Templars split into called?
Are you talking about the orders?
Yeah.
Okay. So you have first of all you have the knights. The knights in shining armor, right? The knights. They're the ones who were equipped with the heavy cavalry. They wore the white habit with their red cross. Next, you have the sergeants. They are equipped with the light cavalry, and they're often selected from the lower social classes, and they wore brown instead of a white mantle. Right? Then you have the serving brothers, also known as the rural brothers, in charge of the order's property, and who perform the more mundane work needed to keep up the infrastructure of this group. The Masons are a part of this order at that level. Excuse me. Then you have finally the chaplains, or ordained priests. So, another question. Good question. Any other questions? No? Okay. All right. So I think we've covered it. I think it's interesting going into the connection between the Templars and the Assassins. So you could see that there is a connection, somewhat pretty direct. It's almost we have our special force, and so the Templars will be the opposite force, working on the other side, the balance of power. What I find is fascinating is the fact that the origins of the Templars are so confusing and almost Byzantine, to the point where you're going, where did they get started? And they get started in a lot of places at once. And yet, apparently through the primary sources, we know that there is an order before the order. You have an order that goes back to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre that seems to be connected to the Hospitallers, but you have the strange echo of the Priory of Zion, and you can see it everywhere, especially the Priory of Zion in connection to Our Lady. And I think one of the important parts is that even in the pronouncement, they mention that Our Lady is our founder, which is, of course, going back into this earlier other order, which is, again, mysterious. And then you have references to the Knights Templar that's before 117, 118, that they exist in some informal style. And then they continue on as 9 people. That's not enough to safeguard any pilgrim. You're not going to, 9 knights. I know they have assistants, but still, it's not enough. And so we should be suspicious of that, because that is strange. Usually and of course, then you have obviously the Council of Troyes, you have the formation of the official order, but shouldn't the official order happen a little earlier than the formation? So again, there's problems. It's almost like they exist, and then they're scrambling around trying to make it legitimate, officially. And so I don't know everything they're up to, but they're up to quite a bit. And we do know that they're digging under the temple because they left so much behind. Too much evidence through archaeology, the little holes they're digging, looking for treasure. The question is, did they find any treasure or not? We don't know that. We do know they became extremely rich, but is that because of their wonderful practice of creating, in a sense, the personal check with the Knights Templar backing? I mean, that's a shrewd financial move. Maybe that's what did it. Maybe it was also their amazing patronage, because they're bringing all these special skills coming from the East, right down to, obviously stained glass windows. That's and coming up with all these other kinds of ideas. It's interesting if you study Gothic architecture, which we did in our talk on Notre Dame. You'll take a look, and there's lots of Templar connections to many of the ideas behind the building of Gothic cathedrals. And so maybe there's something there too. So, yeah. Any other thoughts at all? All right.
I'm going to shut down the recording.
Okay.
There we go.
There you go.
Thank you, James.